Alright, in this tutorial we're going to be making a Highcharts data visualization that looks like this, and it's going to allow a user to just browse through a bunch of data by day, going back and forth, moving forward and moving back from day to day, getting a nice line chart with full animation. So in order to get there, the first thing we're going to do is you're going to need to download jQuery, and pretty much any of the latest versions of jQuery is going to work just fine. So go to the jQuery website and download that. You're going to need to go to the Highcharts website, and you're going to need to download Highcharts. And once you download Highcharts, you just go into the JS folder, and you're going to grab the highcharts.js and the highcharts-more.js files. And you're going to need to put those in your project. And I am also going to be using XAMPP as my server to host the website that we're making here. And you can go to the XAMPP website and download it for Windows or for Linux or for Apple. And it's going to be some pretty default settings. If you're using XAMPP and you want to be able to use domain names like localhost.highchartsfinal.com or whatever you want, after you install XAMPP, you can go into your conf extra folder, go into the httpd vhost conf file, and you're going to be able to put something like this in here. You can take one of these blocks right here, where 80 is the port we're going to be listening on. The document root is where I have my the root of my folder tree for my project, the server name we want to use, and the directory. Since this is Apache 2.4, we're using the Apache 2.4 syntax, require all granted, and I'm going to direct all my error logs into some custom files here. But whatever you're using to host your files is going to be fine. But you can copy this, and this source will be available for you to download with the configurations in the comments down below, or in the description down below of this video. So once you get that stuff downloaded, get it into your project folder. My project folder is called Highcharts here. You can see the highcharts.js. Make yourself an index.html file. And here's my index.html file. It's just going to be very simple. I'm not going to make you sit through me writing out the HTML, so I've got it all ready to go with just a few basic styles. And that is going to get us to this point right here. This is what that HTML is giving us. It's just a couple of labels, a couple of buttons. So we've got ourselves a div where our chart is going to go. We've got ourselves a small container where we're going to list eventually the first day, the current day, and the last day. So we are going to be displaying data that has a date range, and we're going to display the first day in that date range, the last day in that date range, and then the current day is going to be whatever day we happen to be looking at inside of our chart. We've also got a button container with just a couple of buttons that's going to allow the user to click and navigate through the date range, previous day, and next day. And then here's our script files. Here's the basic styling. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started on actually writing some of the JavaScript. Oh, one other thing to mention as well, I do have some fake data that I put inside of a JSON file, and the data structure is pretty simple. I've got an array of objects, and each object has an ID and a history property, and the history property is an array of objects which has timestamps and some readings. And these are just arbitrary, but this is what each one of those records looks like. It has a timestamp and a reading. And if we go all the way to our next record here, you can see the same thing for the next one. So in this fake data set, we've got two IDs, two different sets of history, and then each history has a bunch of timestamps and a bunch of readings. So pretty simple and pretty straightforward. If you've got an API of data that you're going to consume, it'll be easy to substitute in your API instead of a fake data.json file. But if you do not have an API or data already to consume, you can just make up some data, make yourself an array of objects, and put some fake data in there. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is going to make ourselves a module called data chart. And this is going to be the module that's going to contain all the logic for getting our data as well as processing it. And if you are not familiar with this pattern here, it is pretty simple. It basically is taking the data chart variable and saying if it exists already and it's already been defined, then go ahead and pass it in up here. If it's not been defined, then go ahead and pass in an empty object up here, and then we're going to return that object. And then in between here is where we're going to do stuff and add some things to that object. So first, let's go ahead and define some kind of public variables. These are the variables that are going to be, we're going to have our data chart variable exposed in the global namespace, and then we're going to attach a raw data variable to that global variable. So we're going to have raw data. Once we go and get our data, I like to have a raw data store just so I can inspect the data after it comes in and take a look at it before any processing happens. We're going to have a formatted data variable, which hopefully should be obvious. It's just going to be the store after we've done our processing on the raw data. We're going to have a chart ID, which we're going to set a default for here. And that chart ID is just whatever you want the ID of your chart to be. Here I use chart, could be anything. Let's see, let's also define our chart options. And one of the things I like to do with these different charting libraries is you can go onto their website and they'll have demos quite often. And I'll pull up the Highchart's website. And what you can do is you can go to a Highchart's demo, find a demo that you like, hit the view options, and everything inside of the Highcharts here is going to be the options that's going to get you to that particular chart that you're seeing in the background. So I kind of use that as a starting template inside of my code. I copy and paste that, which I'm going to do here just so we can see. Here's one that I got ready, datachart.ops, and I went ahead and copied a spline chart. And actually, let's go ahead and get this up there. Here we go. So you see the chart type is spline. I've already changed the title, the subtitle. The x-axis is expecting a date time format. And I think that's just about it. I changed the line width. You can change animation. Just look through these. Most of them are pretty common sense type things. But that's the data chart options object that we're going to start with. And it makes it nice because if you need to redraw your chart, lots of times you'll need to manipulate some things inside of those options, and then redraw your chart. It just makes it easy to store it there, and you can always, from within the console, take a look at what options you have set for your chart. So we've got that. Now let's go ahead and set up our initialization function. This is the function that we are going to call to kick everything off. And we're going to say at a bare minimum that you need to pass in some data, and you need to pass in a chart ID in order to kick off this data chart. And so this is where we're going to set a raw data equal to the JSON that comes in. And actually, let's go ahead and write on our index page the script that's actually going to kick this off, just so this part makes sense. Let's go ahead and write a script tag, data chart .init. We are going to be get JSON, put in the URL, which is fake data.json. There we go. And then our callback after that comes back. We're going to take the result and pass it into the datachart.init. And let's go ahead and just specify chart here, even though I already have a default set. There we go. So now when this page loads, all these scripts are going to load. It's going to go and get our JSON, the fake data.json, and in the callback, it's going to take the result of the fake data.json file and pass it into our datachart.init. And here's our datachart.init function, where we're setting the raw data. Let's go ahead and set our chart ID. Let's go ahead and we're going to have a process in place that's every time we get raw data, we're going to send it through a processing function. And after it's done processing, we're going to have a draw function. And then after all that, we're going to attach our event listeners for those buttons on the bottom of the page. It's going to allow a user to browse through our data. Alright, so let's get to work on the process function. Datachart.process equals function. And we're going to be passing in the raw JSON there. And let's see. Okay, so let's just go ahead and make an each function. We're going to iterate through all of our data here. And the first thing we want to do is put it into a format that Highcharts can easily understand and work with. Because right now we have those array of objects with the ID and history. The Highcharts doesn't know where the x-axis values are and where the y-axis values are. So we're going to put them into a very simple, a little bit flatter format for Highcharts to look at. So let's go ahead and make a temp data variable that is an array. And this is where, as we pull things out of our raw JSON, that we're going to put it into that temp data variable. So as we're going through each JSON, remember we have an array of objects, and each object has an ID and a history. So in our case, we have two different IDs, so this loop's going to run twice. And then what we want to do is, for each ID, we're going to loop again, and we're going to go through the history. Of each object. And what we want to do is just pull out each timestamp. And by the way, the timestamps I have in my fake data set are normal Unix timestamps in JavaScript, or which is in seconds, and in JavaScript it expects those timestamps to be in milliseconds. So this times 1,000, it's going to convert from seconds into milliseconds. Oops, there we go. Object 2 reading. So for each ID, we're going to iterate through their histories, and we're going to pull out all the timestamps and all the readings, and we're going to put it into the temp data array, and we're going to make it very simple. Highcharts will accept just an array without any labels, which makes it very easy, where this is going to be our X value, and this is going to be our Y value, our X-axis value and our Y-axis value. And one other thing about using dates with Highcharts is that they require you to provide them with sorted data. So if we're going to provide them an array where the X-axis is going to be our dates, we actually have to make sure that that is sorted before sending it to Highcharts. So we're going to make a simple sort function that is going to sort by date. And it's a very simple sort function. It just says look inside of each of these arrays, and we're going to take the 0th element inside one record, subtract the 0th element of the other record we're comparing against, and when you run a subtraction, this is going to be an ascending sort function for numbers. If these were objects, if you didn't have an array of arrays and you were sorting an array of objects, you could do something similar where your key values were in here, and that would work as well. But we've got an array of arrays, so it's easy, just like that. And let's see. Then we're going to take that data that we just pulled out into that format, and we're going to put it into our data chart.ops.series. And inside of our series, each series is going to have a name, which is going to be the ID, and temp data. So remember, we're looping through each ID, and that's going to be the name. We're going to have, in this case, we're going to have two different series because it's going to loop through twice. And actually, since this is our processing function, we may end up calling it more than once. Like if you want to dynamically load data, see how we're just pushing whatever this is onto series? Well, if we run this more than once, then it's going to continue to grow. So let's go ahead and initialize And so anytime we process data, we want to start over with our series. We're not going to continue to add to it forever. All right, there we go. So there's our simple processing. And actually, let's go ahead and, oh yeah, the next part we need is our data chart.draw. So we finished our processing. Now let's go ahead and draw some data. So let's go ahead and make that. And this is going to be very simple. It's going to take our chart ID, which we set up here, make a jQuery selector there, and we're just going to call Highcharts, and we're going to pass in datacharts.ops just like that, and that should draw. So let's see if that worked. Nope, didn't work. Let's see what's going on here. Data charts is not defined. Oops. Not data charts, we want data chart. There we go. Let's try that again. There we go. Alright, so there is all of our data. And you can see this is a week of data from July 12th to July 19th. Now, if you've got a lot of data, now this is only 1 week. If we want to be able to pull in several months of data, you can see how this chart's going to get less and less useful and less performant. It's already a little bit laggy here, just with 1 week of data. So this is the reason why I put in this previous and next day button, because what we're going to do is, even though we've pulled in 1 week of data in our fake data set, we're going to take and only display to the user at any given time 1 full day. So the goal is to start with showing from July 12th to July 13th data, and that's going to give us all the data that's in here, but none of the data over to the right for those days. And that'll hopefully make it a little bit easier to see what's going on inside of this chart, and just make a really simple interface for browsing through our data. So let's see here. Let's go ahead and, after we do our process function, let's go ahead and figure out what our first day, and I'm going to make a new module here in just a second called data helper, because this is functionality that might be useful elsewhere, so it's going to put it into its own modules. But we're going to pass in the series of our data there, and let's figure out what our last day is. Data helper dot get last day. Same thing, we pass in there, and we're going to figure out the current day. Or actually, our current day is going to be our first day. So let's go ahead and just set current day equal to our first day. There we go. Now let's go down here, and anytime I am working with data and doing data parsing, things that might be kind of general and might be reused, I like to put into their own module. But you don't necessarily have to. This could all go inside the same module. Data helper. There we go. And so we're going to have a data helper dot get first day. And get last day. There we go. And so we're going to go ahead and we want to essentially, let's make a first day. Here, let's go ahead and call it, make a smallest variable, because we're throwing in those timestamps, their numbers. The smallest number is going to be the earliest in the date range. So we're just going to call it smallest. And we're going to look inside of our, we're just going to initialize it by setting it equal to the very first record in our set. And this just gives us a starting value for something to start with to compare against. Then we're going to iterate through that data. Oops. There we go. And as we iterate through that data, same thing, we're going to have another nested loop. Now this right here, object.data, as you see up here when we set our series, we've got a name, and then we've got a data property, and the data property is where we're storing all of our data. So that's what we're going to iterate through there. There we go. And basically, if the record we're working on, it's 0 element, which is our timestamp, is less than our smallest value, then we're going to change the smallest value and set it equal to whatever our current timestamp is that we're looking at. And then we're going to go ahead and return smallest. There we go. So look through each series, and inside of each series we're going to loop through every record inside of our data. And for each one of our data records, we're going to look at the timestamp, and if the timestamp we're looking at is smaller than the smallest value we have stored inside of our smallest variable, then we're going to go ahead and update the smallest variable with a new timestamp value, and that's going to return that timestamp value. And so get first day, that's going to be assigned into our data chart.first day variable, and we're going to do something that's very similar for last day. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. The only difference is, instead of smallest, we're going to be looking for the biggest value. And so we're going to change the sign from less than to greater than. Go ahead and save that, and that gets put into our last day. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look inside of here. Go into the console. Oops, forgot to define attachment listeners, but let's go ahead and just type data chart. This is one of the nice things about that module format, is it puts everything into a object which you can easily browse through. Oops, we forgot to assign our formatted data so we could look at that. But there we go. There's our last day, there's our first day, and there's our current day. Alright, so looks like those are getting set fine. One thing I forgot to do, and this is not necessary, it's just having worked with lots of data parsing programs, it's usually nice to have the data, once it's been formatted, put into a variable like formatted data, so that's just easy to look at. let's go ahead and or actually here, let's put it up here. Data chart dot formatted data dot push temp data. There we go. So now we should have an array of arrays, just like our series does. And let's take a look and see if that's there. There we go. Yeah, formatted data. So we got 2 series, and then here's the data for each series. Each series has got a timestamp and a value. Nice. Alright, now that we've got those set, our first day, current day, and last day, we're going to want to have a function which is going to update the DOM with those values. Update display dates. There we go. It sounds good to me. Data chart dot update. Oops. And this is going to be pretty simple. And I'm hard coding these things in here, which is bad practice. These should all be probably injected inside of a configuration object inside the initialization of our module. But hopefully you can figure out what works for you. You're probably going to be working with a framework. I wanted to avoid using frameworks just so that way if you're used to using Ember, Angular, or whatever, I'm not going to be putting a bunch of stuff in here that is unfamiliar to you. So there we go. So first day, last day, current day. I think that is correct. And yeah, so we've got our first day ID, and inside of that span is where we're going to actually list the date. And let's go ahead and take a look at that real quick. It should already be first day, displaying last day. Why did that not work? Data chart dot update display dates. First day span. Let's take a look inside of our console. Attach event listeners is not defined, so maybe that is screwing us up here. Let's go ahead and just make a function real quick for that. Nothing to see there yet. Nope, still not liking it. We're going through a process. We're getting our first day, last day, current day, data chart dot update display dates, and we're going to select the first day span and set the text equal to the data chart dot first. Oops. That's going to come later. There we go. I misspelled those. There we go. There's a timestamp. It's obviously not what we're going to have it look like once we're done. We're going to format these. And this is the point at which we're actually going to want to set, because what we're going to be doing in order to show the user data from July 12th to July 13th in Highcharts, what we can do is we can set the x-axis minimum and maximum properties. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the entire data set to Highcharts. I'm going to say put the x-axis minimum to July 12th and the x-axis maximum to July 13th. And then Highcharts is going to go ahead and ignore all the rest of this data that we fed to it. And what we're going to do is when we click the next days, we're going to change that x-axis minimum and maximum. And that is how we're going to do the browsing through our data here. And so here we're going to go into our data chart options. Let's go ahead and go into our x-axis .min and set that equal to our current day. And this is going to be set next to, or set to basically the same value. Let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. This right here is 1 day in milliseconds. So we're going to take and set the x-axis maximum equal to our current day plus a day. So that's going to be our range that we're going to be looking at. And for the rest of this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste, because we don't want to display these actually to the user. These are the actual values that I want for my data set, but they do not match up. And one thing with JavaScript is that I have a UTC timestamps my fake data, which is what I want to have up here. But I also want to display the UTC time up here. And with JavaScript, if I take those UTC timestamps and put them into JavaScript data objects, it will automatically put it into the local time zone, which is annoying. There are lots of date libraries out there that can help you work with dates more easily. But as you can see here, it gets a little bit verbose. But basically, I'm going to take that timestamp value, put it into a date object, then I'm going to set the time of that date object by adding the time zone offset, so that it puts it into UTC time instead of GMT -7 time zone, which is what I'm in. And then I'm going to take that date object, I'm going to get the month, add 1, because JavaScript does dates in months from 0 to 11 for January through December. I'm going to get the day, I'm going to get the year, update that into a new variable called first day display, which is going to be different than our actual first day. This variable is going to represent what we're showing to the user, which is different than what we are actually using in our data. There we go. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to show them our display date variable. But I'm just skipping past this because it's a lot of dealing with dates, and dealing with dates in JavaScript sucks. So I'm going to save you the boredom there. So there we go. So now we get our data in UTC time, and then that matches up with our what we're seeing here on the screen. 7/12 through 7/19. We're currently looking at 7/12. You can see here on our chart now, it starts with July 12th, ends at July 13th. Nice. Next part we're going to put in place is the next day and previous day buttons. So we're going to need to make sure that our attach event listeners are working, or attach event listeners function is working. And we're going to use delegated event handlers. And previous day is the ID of my button here for previous day. Data chart, and then we haven't made this yet, but let's call it do previous day. So we're going to have a function that's going to do the previous day functionality. Next day, and we'll call this do next day. There we go. So when someone clicks previous day button, we're going to call the do previous day functionality, which we haven't built yet, but we're going to build right here. Data chart dot do. Let's go ahead and do next day first. Next day equals function. All right, so first thing we're going to do is get our chart. So at this point the chart's already been instantiated. It's already been drawn. And we're going to retrieve it and put it into the chart variable. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to find out what the current day is. And the current day is... Actually, let's not make another variable for that. We've already got a public variable for it. And what we're going to say is if data chart dot current day is greater than or equal to data chart dot last day minus 864123112. So what this is doing is it's a check, first of all, to say, is the current day that we're on greater than or equal to one day before the last day? Because if that's the case, then there's not going to be any way to go to the next day. So basically, if we're on our current day is 7/19 already, we can't go to 7/20 because there's no data for that. And so this is that check. Now we're just going to say if that is the case, then you don't get to go to the next day. Sorry. But otherwise, you can proceed on. And what we want to do is update the x-axis minimum to our current day plus 1 day. So we're going to up the minimum by 1 day. Axis.max equals our current day plus 2 days. And let's see, am I forgetting something else here? Oh, yeah, and so after we change the minimum maximum of the x-axis, we're going to need to draw. There we go. So let's see if this works. And something went horribly awry. Let's see, update the axis. Oh, we did not set current day here. Data chart.current day. There we go. July 13 to July 14. July 13, July 14. Looks like it's staying the same actually. And why would that be? We are updating the data chart x-axis minimum to our current day plus a day. The maximum is going forward 2 days ahead of whatever the current day is. And then we're doing a data chart.draw. Okay, so I did some digging and realized what was happening. I was getting different data. So we've got this chart here, and if you pay attention when we click next day, we do actually get different data for that day, but in all subsequent days it's the same. So that's what was throwing me for a loop there. And the reason is because I am not updating our current day, even though I update the x-axis. So I need to move our current day forward 1, just like that. Now let's go ahead and save that, and we should be able to, yeah, there we go, different data, different data, different data. Alright, but you see here our display data is not updating to the user to let them know what date they're actually looking at. So we're going to take care of that next. And let's see here. What we're going to do is I'm going to copy and paste this here. Data chart dot current day display. I'm going to make a new data object with that current day here. And we're going to set the time and again, this is just because I'm converting once we make this, it goes into local time, and I want to put it back into UTC time, which is why I'm doing this. And I'm sure there's probably some other easy way to do it. I usually work with date libraries, but I wanted to do more vanilla stuff just so it'd leave you guys open with more options. And after we set the time, get the month, date, and full year. And we haven't made this yet, but we're going to make it. Or actually, yes, we've already made the update display dates. That's right. We're just going to go ahead and tell it to update. So now we go back into here. We'll hit next day. Undefined is not a function. Forgot to update one of my variable names. Data chart.current day display. I did some copy and pasting because I've already made this project and I'm kind of going off of what I've already done and just extracting a piece of that for this video. There we go. Use the correct variable names. Cannot read get month of undefined. It probably helps if I can spell. There we go. Now you can see our display date updating. Nice. And let's try to go past and see if our check, yeah, so we hit next day, we're already at 19th, 19th is the last day, it's not going to let us go past. Great. So that's working just like we want. Now the other part is basically the same thing, but for previous day. One other thing that I like about this module pattern is it makes a nice API for other programmers to use, but you also get to do things like, without having to worry about the DOM at all, is be able to operate your program. And your interface is just ends up connecting into your application API that you made. So it makes it nice for testing. It makes it nice that you can make your application without worrying about the full design or interface options. Or lots of times what you'll end up doing is you'll get several buttons that'll do the same thing. So you make your API here, and then you put your event listeners, which call the API. So if we have a next day here, we might have other buttons that do something similar, have next day on the bottom and on top as well. And you can both tie those to that API. So just an aside there, another nice thing about this pattern of exposing your module to the global namespace. And we have a do previous day. And let's see, as far as our logic goes, instead of being greater than, we're going to do a less than check. it's not going to be the last day, it's going to be our first day. There we go. So if our current day is less than or equal to our first day, then return out. Otherwise, proceed forward. And let's see if I can get this correct here. We want our minimum to go back 1 day from the current day, and our maximum to be equal to whatever the current day is, because our current day is always going to be what's on the left here. So that is now going to be moved over to the right. And we're going to subtract a day there. And I think all of this is going to be the same. And then we're going to call update display dates and draw. Let's see if that does the trick. Next day, 14th, and go backwards, 13th. Yep, looks like it's working, and we can't go past. Okay, great. So now it is working. We've got ourselves a data browser, so we've got a week of data, and we can browse through day by day. And you can see how this would be useful if you have larger data sets. Again, providing the user with some way to quickly and easily get a view of the data that actually makes sense. And if this were 2 or 3 months of data all put on here at the same time, they're not going to be able to get any kind of useful information out of that chart. So put it into a day, and we can actually get some useful information here. So it's kind of nice. All right. I think that is going to be it for this video. If you have any comments, make sure to put those down in the comment section. Oh, one other thing I forgot. I don't want to pass on is, in order to get this localhost.highcharts.com, not only did you need to change your vhost, but you also do need to change your host file. If you're on Windows, that's inside System32 drivers etc, and it's your host file like that. Let's go ahead and open this up real quick, and there we go. And you can see here, localhost.highcharts.com, you're going to need to map to 127.0.0.1. And same thing for Linux. Your host file is going to be a different place, but you are going to have a host file. Just look up whatever your distro is on Google, and do a search for host file on whatever distro you're on, and it should give you the default location for that. If you're on Windows with your host file, you're probably not going to be able to edit it by opening it from the etc folder. So what you'll need to do is copy this host file, paste it onto your desktop, open it up, change it, and then copy and paste it back into here. Windows prevents you from directly editing that host file typically. So yeah, I think that is it for this video. Let me know what you think.